Hello and welcome to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past and talk about their impact and relevance today. I'm Tim Longo Jr., and I'm joined as always by a man who, when you take his first initial and add it to his last name, it spells Satan.
Brett Duville. I mean, Sam Ayton? Samuel
Hayden.
Brett Duville.
Yeah, it was a stretch, but...
That's good, Sterling Hayden. That's pretty good. We're, of course, referring to Doom 2016, the reboot, I guess you'd say, of the Doom franchise. Came out from id Software a while ago. It had been a while between Doom installments, so I think it's fair to call it a complete reboot of the series.
Yeah,
right? There's 1, 2, and 3, and then that was it. There was no 4, so...
No, you're right. I guess my question there, I haven't spent the time to get, as you know, I do occasionally like to get into the lore and the fiction of something, and there definitely is obviously a lot more in this one than the others. However, I feel like from the opening, I got the impression that they were trying to thread the needle on it. I mean, I guess it is a reboot from a business standpoint, but fictionally...
Right. Yeah, no, fictionally, I think it all theoretically literally all ties together.
Yeah.
Like it brings in anything Doom related. Yeah. Even the RPG mobile thing.
Yeah. Right.
I think is all conceivably within the same universe. That's like a thing that they literally somehow justify. And I've never gone because I don't care about lore. I never went and kind of traced that stuff down, but I did hear about that in some other podcasts. It's like, oh, in theory, that all ties together. Yeah. Which makes sense, especially where this game ends up, which I won't spoil for you because we'll get to it, but you're thinking about continuing.
I'm going to try. Yeah.
So this is your first experience. I played it when it came out, and you didn't.
No. Yeah. And I
talk about why?
I remember why. Yeah, I do. As I started playing again, it kind of jogged my memory. I mean, I might have talked about this on the earlier episodes of the series. When it comes to my free time as a player, I really want to spend my time on something that fits my liking to as best as it can. And I'm just not that sort of heavy metal, hardcore gore Doom kind of player, I don't know what's a good sort of counter to that. Well, I have a counter coming up when we talk about, I do want to talk about comparing it to Prey specifically, but Dishonored, those sorts of games, right, that have a different sort of flavor about them. And this one does what it does really well. And I think it, I've only played 3 levels, but it seems like, it's quite a very good game. And they nail that heavy metal sort of feel. And that's great. It's just not my thing. So I think, when everyone said, oh my God, they brought the original Doom, feeling back, and it's just harder core than it's ever been before. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. Good for them. I don't know if I need to play that.
Yeah.
So that was why, but they definitely nail it.
It's a game that struggled a while to find what it became. And I think some stuff was out, sort of promotionally a ways out. I think they showed it at a QuakeCon or something. But originally it was literally sort of hell on earth. And was more Call of Duty feeling, where you had this sort of linear story bring you towards, literally a story with stuff that was going on, bringing you towards whatever the center of hell was in New York or something like that. Some really interesting stuff, and that it was a project, and I have to be careful here because I was at ZeniMax at the time, or at Bethesda, and it felt like it never really found its footing. The technology was always very good, the feel of the game was always very good, but they hadn't really cracked what it was meant to be. Trying to do that sort of what was more in style at the time. And I think at some point, someone somewhere just said, hey, why don't we just make Doom?
Yeah.
And it found its footing again. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting because thinking back, like Doom 3 came out before we shipped Republic Commando. Because I remember it was even sort of an influence on us a bit. It was something we all played and were aware of.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean,
and Rage was in there. Quake 4. And it wasn't fully involved with all that stuff, but there might have even been a Wolfenstein in there somewhere too. Not
there was not by them.
Not the machine game.
It was it was the Wolfenstein that was like, was it?
Well, there's the machine games series.
Some time travel thing, right? There was a
might have been Raven or
that was
something.
Made by somebody in Wisconsin. Yeah, it might have been Raven.
Yeah. And I can't share some of the stories that I know too, but it definitely was a long because it definitely have colleagues and acquaintances that worked on all the iterations of the game, to be honest, and it definitely went through, I think, a couple reboots and a lot of changes. But I think that's when you're kind of rebooting something, which I have some experience in. There is a lot of that sort of tumultuous back and forth time of like, well, what does it mean? How true do you stay to the original?
What's the important stuff?
Yeah. What do you change? What do you not change? So I definitely feel for them, and I'm happy for what I've played so far. I mean, I feel like, and it's obviously cool for us because we play for the podcast in the way that we do. So we just finished playing the original, and like, I think in many ways in my mind's eye, this is a modern version of that game we just finished playing. And
totally agree.
They did it, and that's a feat. That is an amazing.
It really is. I mean, it's the Half-Life 3 problem, right? I mean, what is that game ever, right?
Are you coining
it's
that?
Hard. Well, no, I'm just saying it's hard to imagine taking a franchise that is so storied and bring it into the modern day.
Yeah.
And like, I'm not suggesting there's a Half-Life 3, but it's just like the Herculean effort it takes to make something that is that.
What do you do?
Kind of revered. Yeah. What do you do?
Yeah.
Yeah. And some of the choices they make here are frankly surprising, but in line with sort of modern expectations. And I think, we're going to kind of dive into that. Because I think that the audience would not be happy with traditional Doom. I don't think it's enough today. I mean, at the time it was amazing, but today I don't think it quite would stack up against other things, even if it were 3D and looked as amazing as it does. But you bring in some of that other stuff, like what you called resource skill loops, because hoity-toity designer man over there. I mean, let's kind of turn to that stuff, because I think those, I guess they call them glory kills, and the various different ways that you can do sort of special kills to kind of push forward. I mean, I don't know. It's like taking it up to that extra level that you can almost imagine back in the day.
Yeah. I didn't know. I'm sure there's a good term that some smarter designer than I has come up with in some book out there. So I don't know what the official term for them are, but I strung some words together that's longer than even what you just said, because I wasn't really sure how to describe it. But this sort of infinite interconnected positive reinforcement, resource skill loops, and that's definitely a too long way of saying, they've made positive reinforcement loops connected to engaging with the enemy. Often, I think actually mostly 100% of the time so far, what I've played in a CQC situation to attain your health and your ammo, which for shooters is often counterintuitive because you try to stay at range, right, and stay away from them, and so it draws you
shooting.
Yeah, because you're shooting, and it draws you in and makes the game more sort of visceral and just kind of in your face. And of course, there's a lot of advantages to that sort of design, but it's really brilliant in a lot of ways. And then they attach the positive reinforcement for resource skill loops, meaning you're getting your health and your ammo based on what weapon you're using and such. And so that's just this sort of infinite loop that's going to happen. So if you're engaging in combat and you stun somebody, then you're going to go in for like glory kill. You're going to see the glory kill up close. You're going to see the character and the animations up close, which, artists and animators always want you to be able to see, and you're not just seeing them from pixel distance away. And then you get rewarded by that. And in fact, not only rewarded, but as far as I can tell from a balance and tuning perspective, you have to, it's the way you have to kind of play, because you eventually starve yourself of those resources if you don't. And so they had to balance toward that. And then combining that with the fact that I believe there's a finite number of enemies on each level, because there's sort of that combat statistics that they track. If you get 100% or something, you get extra skill points or something. Yeah. So they actually have a closed circuit. They do. They know exactly how much you could possibly get. Yeah. Like your sort of minimum and your maximum.
Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack there. I want to start with visceral, because that's a term we say all the time. And
it's overused.
It's hard. It's overused, but I think it's worth unpacking, and I think this game is in some ways pretty pure to understand what it means. For me, at least how it works in this game. So let me unpack that a little bit.
Yeah.
The first thing is, of course, you already mentioned, like, this sort of being up close and personal and seeing something in all its glory and even slow motion detail. So there's sort of like, I'm doing this thing that I'm not really doing, right? I'm just getting a little video dopamine, drip of, I hit the button at the right time, and therefore I got this curb stomp / rip head off / rip arm off beat thing together, whatever the animation is. I basically get this little 3-second payoff. But the other thing that I think that often does in a practical sense is it draws me right into the center of a group of enemies, probably, especially when there are more around. So now I have threats on all sides. So it increases sort of the adrenaline of, now I have multiple things to deal with, because I saw the thing flash. I did the immediate response that I had, which was they hit that button and drag me right into the middle of it, not necessarily even knowing what I was going to do next with the rest of them.
Yeah.
And I think that's the sort of loop that contributes to that visceral feeling, is not only have I done that, but now I'm going to probably do it a bunch of times in a row because there's several things around me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the yield, risk versus reward of that, right? You see that flash and you want what you can get from that finishing blow. But like you said, often the way the enemy designs are, they're going to group the levels themselves, and the rooms themselves are generally fairly tight as far as the ones I've seen so far. So, and then taking one particular enemy like the Imp, which I really like their sort of their reimagining of the Imp, specifically because it's a very mobile character, and it jumps around a lot. And so when you get in close like that, it definitely does it'll do some melee attacks, which most of the melee attacks tend to do quite a bit of damage. So that reinforces your point about, pulling yourself into danger. But then they also are very agile, so they can jump away and climb and get away from you as well. So it sort of causes this contracting and expanding sort of, rhythm to the combat that a lot of shooters don't really have. And I think to their detriment that they don't, because it tends to be fairly samey and take it from me. And then the pacing of it, just doesn't feel very dynamic. And I've felt it immediately in this game, even with some of the few number of enemies that you find early in the game. And then you throw in, I think the hardest enemy that I found so far is that bigger, not even sure what it must be the equivalent of the pinkies, huh? The bigger guys.
With that sort of thick, the what?
They're pretty big and
they're big and they have that thick skull plate.
And they run and they charge you and jump on pound and stuff. Is that the equivalent of the pinky then?
Yeah, I actually didn't look that up because I didn't know if the analogs were all there. I can't remember later in the game if there's something that's a better analog.
Yeah.
But yeah, they certainly serve a similar purpose. No, I think there's a later Pinky Demon that's actually more Pinky Demonish. But
that guy in particular, I wanted to call out because up until meeting him, you you can feel fairly confident closing in and accomplishing the goals, at least on my difficulty. I'm basically playing in the middle difficulty. But with him, because he's harder to take down, and his main or maybe only damage type is melee, it forces you to retreat finally. And so you are actually kind of moving around the room and the level quite a bit because you're trying to get damage on him. So he starts flashing, which basically causes you to move through the other enemies who are at range. And there's just a nice orthogonal enemy design happening there where it just is pitting all that sort of those little mechanics against each other. So they did a great job with those enemy combos too. And I can only imagine later as I'm meeting all the other enemies that it's going to get crazier and crazier. So
yeah, that is not, in fact, the pinky. I'm looking at pictures online. I'm like, oh yeah, that's what the pinky looks like, and he is, yeah, even more. So we've seen a number of different characters who are, I think, new to this specific game, and I'm actually trying to figure out exactly which one. Maybe it's the Hell Knight. Yeah, the Hell Knight actually is the one you're thinking of, with the sort of thick cranium, no eyes.
He's pretty big, right? He's
pretty big. Yeah, he's good size. So is the third level, is that the Foundry?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. That's as far as I get as well. That's kind of my least favorite level, I think, in the game. I think it's a little long. I've always felt that Doom levels are better short. Yeah. And that one feels a little long because there's 4 different gore whatever things that you gotta gore nests that you gotta deal with. So you gotta run around quite a bit.
A lot of back and forth. Yeah.
A lot of back and forth. There's some interesting secrets in there that I feel like are hard to get, though I got them all originally because this, as I mentioned last time or the time before, this was a platinum trophy game for me. It is a game that I played more or less right when it came out, which is funny because I remember seeing the demo. I think I had left Bethesda by the time the demo for this particular version was out at an E3 or QuakeCon or whatever. And I saw it and I was like, whoa, that's very, very gory. Like that's a little much because of those sort of close, I don't know, glory kills or whatever. I remember thinking, wow, I don't know if that's a thing for me. And then I saw the reviews and was like, well, I don't know. Maybe I'll give it a try. It sounds like it captures some of that old Doom feeling. And I was pretty well hooked. So, yeah. Yeah.
Kind of speaking of tone for a quick second, the other aspect that I really like, and you kind of mentioned a bit of the history and sort of original sort of direction of the game and where it ended up. Which of course in the original that we played for the podcast, they didn't have the fidelity or the means to really like fully realize what it means to be the Doom Marine, and how absurd it is in a way and not taking itself too seriously. I think with the one exception of the sort of text scroll that would happen at the end of the levels where you get a little bit of that flavor of sort of how melodramatic the universe really is.
The gothic, over the top. Yeah.
And just, it's like, you're the only one who can do it. And and you did it. And, just kind of the attitude, basically the heavy metal attitude. But they just, in this game, there's just so many nice touches to, everything from as a little example is when you find those drones that you get the upgrades from, he just pulls the upgrade and just punches the drone for no reason. And then, ripping arms off of corpses to use their palm to open doors, and then he just doesn't care. He doesn't let people finish their voiceover when they're talking to him over intercoms. He just
smashes the computer. Sterling Hayden will be like, "Hey, you got to really be careful with the clamps on the such and such, and this is a delicate operation." He just takes his boot and shoves it through the thing. Yeah, it is definitely like, oh, I have to disconnect this thing. Here's a way that'll work. And they actually, I feel like they play into that even further as the story goes on. I actually would love to hear what you think of finishing this game, having finished it myself,
right.
because I mean, we can just talk off air at some point about it, but I was not entirely anticipating where it went, and then when it got to where it went, I was just like, oh man, what a wild, like it just really explains his attitude. Let me just put it that way. So yeah, I think it's very clever. I think it's a very clever way to tackle this game.
Okay. Yeah. Is it, how long? I mean, you don't have to tell me levels, but like, is it a very long game or is it medium? Or?
I don't feel like it's super long. Okay. 6 to 8 hour type thing. I certainly don't remember. My recollection is this went by in kind of a haze.
Yeah.
A bloodlust haze of level after level. And it also has some of the nice variety of the original in that some levels are shorter than others. It does feel a little bit more, I mean, there's a lot more enemies, a lot more enemy types. And then there's also just, it's very sort of corridor arena to a certain degree. So it depends on how well some of that goes for you, I guess, in terms of how quickly you get through it.
Yeah.
Well, I'd honestly be interested. I mean, you could just like dial down the difficulty, honestly, and just like get through the story such as it is, and which is another thing that's different. Yeah. Because there are characters here that you're talking to and seeing, much like Rage had, which was not a total success, I think, for a lot of reasons, but you did have actual characters you interacted with in the world. They were kind of sort of taking tentative steps in that direction. This is much more BioShocky. Like, you see the characters, you don't get to talk to them really. You see, they deliver whatever they're going to deliver, whether it's by audio or through a glass or whatever. So it's like, it's forward looking from its own design, but also backward looking from where it is right in 2016. Yeah. So it's, I don't know, just some interesting stuff.
It is. Yeah, it is that's well put. It is such a weird thing. I mean, I definitely stand by the fact that they succeeded at what they were trying to do. But to your point, like, if you think too hard about it, there definitely are things that feel archaic as well. And I would even say with the first 3 levels so far, I would include level design in that right now. That's why I was kind of saying I was hoping that you could convince me to keep going, because I do want to keep playing. Like, I do think about the game when I'm not playing, so that's a good sign. But my worry right now, based on the first 3 levels, is that so far it feels very, very samey, and like it's going to be this sort of thing, the whole time. And I typically need a little escalation or, some twists and turns, not in the story, but just in the gameplay of it all. And so I assume probably the weapon and enemy design will be what will start mixing that up. I'm playing on the medium difficulty, and I haven't felt that it's too very difficult so far. I don't know if I've even died from an enemy yet. I've fallen into lava and jumped.
I did that too.
Did you get the Terminator?
Yes, I did. For the thumbs
up. Yeah.
Brilliant. That for sure. Yeah. I had gotten that before. I would say this is very similar to the original in the sense that it gets a little more abstract as time goes on, and I think that helps.
Okay. Yeah.
So there are levels where, and I'm just like casting back in my brain, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember doing that thing. Like, wow, that was a thing. So I think there is some of that. I don't think it goes really out there. I do think as you blend more with Hell, I mean, I think one of the things that's happening is we're definitely still in this section, just playing the first few levels, where it's like, oh, I'm recognizably on Mars. This could be Total Recall from whatever, 1996 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Or I guess earlier, but this could be that. Like, it looks like that. And except that there's, demons all over the place. And it takes a while until you get to the point of like, oh, I'm literally bleeding through into this this hell dimension that they're talking about. And I think that's when it actually starts to shine even more. Because like I said, you've gotten to the 3rd level, which is probably my least favorite. for a number of reasons, but a lot of it has to do with, well, you're kind of going all over the place. It's easy to get lost. The level design is, it's kind of okay. I mean, but it does feel like two levels that were tighter might have been better in that section, right? So it's sort of like there was a story reason or something that justified this level more than the actual design that they came up for it. Which is, we understand how that happens, right? It's like, oh, we came up with this idea, we started testing it, didn't quite work, but here we are. Oh my God, we're shipping tomorrow. It's here it goes. Yep. So it definitely kind of feels that way to me. I don't know. I mean, I think it's worth. I loved playing all the way through it, obviously. So I went back and even nightmared, and played with multiplayer. There was some multiplayer stuff I had to do for the trophy, and that's not a thing I do. Like, me, I never play multiplayer games anymore. Yeah. Mostly because I stink. I'm terrible. Well, I'm just not good at them, but yeah.
Well, and I think, like I said, I feel compelled to continue. So, and there's some of the. It's definitely a game that feels like it's at odds with itself. Like I said earlier, if you think too hard about it. For instance, like I feel sort of liberated in the fact that I don't have too much, sort of too many required modal mechanics for the weapons. For instance, aim down sights is not a thing by default. So, not every weapon has it. I haven't found any that, like you said, it sounds like there's sort of alt fire stuff that maybe does it, or weapons down the road. I'm sure there's a sniper rifle or something like that, but it's all opt in for the most part. You don't need to use it. And so I feel that, I mean, it's nice to not have to do that, It's nice to not have to reload, and things like that. So it's like, on one hand, it's like that's really retro and throwback and feels weird because it's absent, but they counter that by having the max ammo not that high. So you're constantly running out of ammo for the weapon you're using, and then switching and then using these infinite resource loops. So it's a pretty well tightly tuned thing that I really appreciate so far. I guess I just, to jump really quickly into my Prey comparison.
Yeah, I wanted to get to that. That's what I'm eyeing that here in my list.
Yeah, and that's the reason that's the only reason that's pushing me away sometimes when I'm thinking about spending some time to play it, because there's lots of other things that I like to play on my free time. But so because I've become such a huge fan of Prey, obviously I compare a lot of stuff with it, and trust me, I understand Doom is not trying to be Prey. So it's not a comparison of like one game is better than the other. It's just sort of for me. Well,
it's also hard when you look at this. Like, so I look at like Olivia, what's her name? That's the baddie that you're kind of finding at the end of level 3. Olivia Pierce. Yeah. And you look at her and you're like, that looks exactly like a Dishonored or Prey enemy, like bad person, like an NPC that you're totally supposed to frame or whatever. Yeah. So it's weird. It's disjointed just from the art presentation at some points.
Yeah, it's almost got
probably some bleed over there, to be honest, because they aren't the same umbrella. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Maybe it's weird to say this because I do want to also play the Wolfenstein series, the new series that Machine Games has been working on, and others. Because I also have missed that one, and I think that one might actually resonate more with me. But I do feel like Bethesda's sort of to sound douchey a little bit, kind of creating a bit of its own oeuvre right now with its sort of tone of games. Somehow, I don't think they have an umbrella sort of, I don't know, chief creative officer guiding that at all. But it seems to be happening anyway. But praise.
No, but there was that, was it Antonov? I don't know if he crossed over at all. And I say that because I literally don't know, because I was gone by the time this game was coming out. But, the art designer who had worked on Dishonored and originally had maybe Half-Life 2 or whatever.
Yeah. Could have been.
And it does feel that way a little bit like that. At least that influence is there, whether or not the specific that person came in and said, hey, do this or hey, do that. So yeah, I can definitely see it. They're different engines, which is also weird. Dishonored, at least Dishonored 1 and 2, I didn't look up Prey, are Unreal Engine games. And of course, this is id Tech, obviously. And the Wolfenstein games are id Tech.
I think Prey might be id Tech.
It might be. I don't know if they had shifted all the way over at that point. I mean, the team would have been more familiar with Unreal at that point, but at a certain point, it's like, well, yeah, but this is the one we have. Actually, it was CryEngine.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, I remember that weird choice.
Even weirder, yeah.
Yeah. But and then the other one, just to close the loop, The Evil Within, which we played as a bonus.
Oh yeah,
for Resident Evil, I guess, was also an id Tech game.
Yeah,
so.
Bethesda as a publisher is very interesting. Yeah,
yeah, they really are.
Another topic, but I think I'd use Prey as a comparison because they're both science fiction based. They're both sort of like out there off of Earth, trying to do a thing. And I think the thing that really hit me with Prey and that I really loved that propelled me to keep playing the game is they really fully realize a sense of place for that space station. And every single room has this attention to detail and love where there's some amount of, even minimal, sometimes a lot of logic, but even minimal logic and sort of like, oh, this is a thing. That makes somewhat sense. And so I'm going to keep going through and I want to keep finishing and, helping this situation out. And it's not really what Doom's bread and butter is, but when I run through hallways and rooms in Doom, it feels more like they've just sort of painted the coat of paint of Doom paint over every surface. And there isn't really much else to it. It's very well fully realized as far as like its art fidelity. That panel looks like a panel and, the lights look good and the UI looks good and the bodies and the gore and everything. But if I stop and look around, I'm not really in a place. I'm just in a hallway.
A level. Yeah.
I'm in a level, and that's kind of what the original was like. So I can't blame them too much. But for me, that, Prey was like, I am in this space station. And even if there's demons running around or whatever, even if it's kind of science fiction fun, I just am propelled forward differently, and with Doom, it's like, it's just kind of raw, almost, extreme comic booky kind of feel to it, which I like sometimes. But anyway, that's my Prey versus Doom sort of, for me personally, sort of comparison. Because
I totally get that. Because I worked on Tacoma, which was from the developers of Gone Home, and I would actually liken those two games in a way because Gone Home is a very grounded space. It's a house, like you understand it when you're moving around in it. And then you go to Tacoma and it's a space station, and that I've never been to one, right? I mean, I don't have an expectation of what that space is like. And I feel like that here as well. Whereas Prey, I think, tries to make it feel more like, I don't know, a hotel or a resort or something, that it feels like a place you've been, even if it's a place in space. Absolutely. Like it's big enough, I think that's a big thing, which is not here. It's like, oh, you're constantly chasing a MacGuffin, right? Oh, I've got to get through here to this thing, right? I mean, it's the same with BioShock, and, it's similar to Prey in that way. It's like, oh, it feels like an underwater city. Like I'm going from this place to this place. They feel connected in some ways. I take a subway, which, throws you back to like, I don't know, System Shock 2, which we also played, which is like, oh, I get on this elevator. I'm going between these different levels of station. Now I'm in this level with where they do the food, like this is where they grow stuff. And here there's not a lot of consideration about that, which again, as you point out, totally fine. It makes total sense for the game that they're making, and you're not supposed to stop and think about it too much.
No,
I'm reminded of what was it? The second Austin Powers movie where, what's his name? It's from all those movies in the 70s, and he turns and looks. He says, you shouldn't think too hard about this. And then he turns and looks directly at the audience and says, and you shouldn't either. It definitely feels, it feels like that. Oh my God, what is that guy's name? He was in Logan's Run
Oh, right.
Famous actor.
All right.
Michael York.
Yeah, he's in Gilmore Girls.
He is in Gilmore Girls, but there's a scene in that movie where he looks directly does direct address to the audience and says, "Yeah, and you shouldn't think too much about it either, because he's, I don't know, he's Q or something like that, or like M for
right
Austin Powers."
Yeah, and that's why it's hard for me sometimes with games like this, and why I'm often not drawn to them in my free time, because I do want to care a little bit about what my motivation is, and to push me forward. And if I don't, then I just lose interest, So from a game developer's perspective, I can appreciate it for all sorts of reasons and keep playing for those same reasons. But, for us, and I mean, we have a podcast about this, I guess. For us, when we play games, we look at them differently than other people probably, I'm constantly, especially playing a shooter, because I've made shooters. I'm constantly thinking about all the different decisions they made to do this, that, or the other thing. And so when I get sort of kicked out of that mentally, because like the Foundry is actually a good example, because my willing suspension of disbelief goes away, because the Foundry, from a sort of level design perspective, makes almost no sense as far as I could tell, right? It's just got a lot of lava emptying into a bunch of places, So
yeah, it feels like a place where they tried multiple paths. I mean, you can basically do different things in different orders, except for the final door or whatever, and it feels like a bit of an experiment that didn't quite pan out. Which is why I'd like to see you get past it and just try other more.
I will,
because like I said, I do think it's honestly it's a shame it's so early in the game, because I do feel like it's like the weakest link.
Okay, well, that's good to know that it only goes up from here. So it's quite an interesting and good game. They did a great job. So obviously they don't need they've already been told that by many people. So I'm glad they got that recognition.
It's funny because I think I'm different than you in terms. I mean, I will play games where I'm analyzing them, but it's always been because I'm now working on a thing like that, and so I'm playing it specifically as research. When I first went to LucasArts, Darren Stinnett, who we've had on the cast, was like, "You need to play some flight sims when you come here." I was like, "Oh, okay, tough job," But at the same time, when I played them very differently than I would have if I were playing them at home. But when I do play at home, and this is part of why I always play on a console when I'm playing, is it's different than when I work. I work on a PC. I play on a console. So that's why I always play with a controller in my hands. It just feels different.
Yeah.
So
that's a good point.
Part of how I disconnect.
I think it ratchets up for me the closer it gets to competition, to be honest. Like if it's a genre that's
totally fair.
Far away, like a Civilization or something, or a platformer, then well, even platformers, because of some of the Tomb Raider stuff, like there's a lot of analog there, but
no, that's fair.
But yeah, when it's a shooter like this, which is direct competition, for me, obviously I'm going to be scrutinizing it differently, and it'll be hard to step away sometimes. But for Prey is a good example of a game that was so good for me that I stopped thinking about it. You know what I mean? I lost myself in the game, and the games that really, Dishonored as well, that really grab me are the ones where I do forget that I'm a developer.
So the immersive part of immersive sims just happens to work.
It just happens to work if it's a good one. Yeah.
Fair enough. I think there are a few other odds and ends, but I don't think like we've missed anything really important in terms of how this game feels.
No, we can move. Yeah, we can move on, I think.
So let's turn to feedback. We have no new reviews. I'm going to double check that's true. No new, and certainly no new singing reviews this week, but we do love those, and so keep those coming in the future, so that Tim will have to sit through that as I sing. I spent a lot of time preparing for those, I'll have you know, and I'm a little scratchy tonight. I've been feeling the whole time I've been talking. But anyway, let's instead turn to email. I'm going to go first because I had to space things out so that you would get the one that was specifically directed for you to read.
Okay.
I have one here from Mike Vogt, whom we've heard from before. It says, hello, Dev Game Club. The subject is rudimentary WASD. Your Doom series is giving me wonderful flashbacks to the spring of 1995 on a weekday afternoon when my family's new gateway computer was less than a week old. My dad came home from work with a small stack of floppy disks he'd borrowed from a coworker. One disc had the classic collection of 30-ish Apogee shareware games, and the remaining 5 were Doom 2. My mother protested, but after promising her I wouldn't use the chainsaw, I was allowed to play.
Well, that
and
does
play
it.
I did. And play I did. This was the only game I touched until I got Dark Forces for my birthday later that summer. Also, I picked up the chainsaw every time. Sorry, Mom. Your series is all. Oh, I'm sure she knew. Your series is also making me confront one of my biggest gamer shames. I've never played the original Doom. So this past Friday, I picked it up from GOG.com and got to work. The first hurdle was getting over the archaic control scheme. While I used to play Doom 2 using default keyboard-only controls, shoutouts, I find this completely unusable today. Also shoutouts. Fortunately, the GOG version of Doom comes with a DOSBox wrapper that allows you to remap the controls, and it maps strafe left-right separately from turn left-right. So I was able to recreate a basic version of today's standard PC FPS control scheme using WASD to move and then mouse to aim side to side. I did a bit of reading on the origins of WASD controls, and while Half-Life seems to be the first big title to use it as the default scheme, it was apparently used by champion Quake players a few years before that in what seems like an unfair advantage over players who hadn't adopted it. As game developers, do you see any unexplored avenues for radically different or innovative control schemes, given that everyone has a keyboard and mouse and that all the standard console controllers are basically the same? Are there any shortcomings inherent to those hardware designs that you think could be overcome with new hardware or some outside-the-box thinking? Thanks, Mike Vogt. So that's a big open question. I'm sure you don't have any immediate thoughts. It takes a moment always.
Yeah, it definitely takes me a bit.
I do remember actually the WASD being a thing with Half-Life adopting it.
It was my memory though. It was
before there was arrows, right?
It was Quake though. Yeah, I do remember Quake. Well, from my memory,
with Champion Quake, right? Remapping, but not default.
No, not as default. No, but as far as WASD becoming a thing, I remember because we would play in the in the level design pit. We would play Quake 1 that way, and it was kind of getting around, And there were some of the level designers on Dark Forces and Jedi Knight, Inger Shu being one of them, were just savants, and they were the ones writing the whatever forums that BBSs of the day. It's like,
right. We call them Vidiot savants, by the way.
Okay, great. Good, I like that. But yeah, we had obviously a warped perspective too because we were already in development, so people were used to remapping and stuff. But yeah, as a default, I'm sure. I mean, Valve was always, even with their first game, they were always good at quickly trying to adopt what the community was doing out there, and they weren't afraid to make that default.
I suspect that there's some VR stuff that's gonna come. It's not a space I'm gonna play in a lot, just because I'm very prone to motion sickness. But I expect that there's gonna be something in VR that is natural that we haven't quite found yet. That whether it's with sort of a the Vive, I guess, is the Steam one.
Now the Index,
the Valve one, rather, whatever it's called. But where you have actual sensors around the room to help detect. I think there's probably stuff there, and there may be fidelity issues. I mean, I honestly feel that way a little bit about the Kinect, that it enabled some things that were one of the things I think that it enabled was for a wider variety of people to play at the same time. So kids could play with adults and be basically at the same fidelity of play, right? Without better gross motor control or something like that, right? I mean, I played some Double Fine games with nieces and nephews, and here I was in my 30s or early 40s, and they were under 10, and we could play these games together. So I think that there have been some advances like that just do a different thing. I don't know that they're radically, I mean, that was definitely radically innovative. Also a failure, right? It's not around anymore. So I don't know. It's a complicated question.
Yeah, I mean, to some degree, if I had a good answer, you
wouldn't be telling on a podcast. You'd be patenting.
Yeah. A similar one, just not really fully answering sort of like what's the next thing for his question, but to his point about WASD, to some degree, MOBAs have actually created a new WASD in the ability triggering of the keyboards. And so I guess is it QWR or is it
I have no idea.
I think it's ASDF. Anyway, so a lot of games, especially RPGs, have started to adopt the MOBA ability key similar to what WASD. And so it's become, because MOBAs have become so popular, a lot of people already have that, just like WASD, a lot of people already have that in their head. And so they'll map the same way because people are used to it. So that's kind of a modern version of WASD that I would say is starting to percolate through and seems to have been growing over the last 5 to 8 years.
I bet there's some similar stuff in in the RTSs and things like that. You may look at StarCraft or Warcraft or whatever. I mean, those are getting a little older now, so I guess it's not kind of current, but it's the same thing you see there with sort of how do you map your function keys, I guess, to like different groupings and things like that was a thing, right?
Yeah,
like
sure.
shift to assign and all that stuff. And yeah. So that was another kind of natural extension of the keyboard. Keyboard's very flexible that way. So
yeah, for sure. Well, and MOBAs being an extension of RTSs, right? That's their lineage there, and in fact,
true. Yeah.
Weird sort of reverse influence there is that some of the more recent RTS-ish games are actually using some of those MOBA controls. So it's kind of like if kind of looped around, and the MOBAs are now influencing RTSs in some ways, especially in the simplification of characters and things like that. So character numbers. But yeah, that's a good. I think I would probably agree with you, and I would throw out the VR sort of general answer that I think the innovations and things that we won't see coming are going to come in that direction. Especially I haven't played a lot with them, but with their controllers, not even the VR aspect, but even much more the controllers themselves, the Oculus Touch stuff and the Index and Vive controllers that Valve developed, are kind of taking, sort of like you were saying with your example of playing with different age groups, that, taking away the concept, because the controller itself is such a foreign object to most people who aren't used to it, and
right.
most people can't use it. These new controllers are just sort of like naturally fit in your hand, and buttons and sensors are mostly because of the VR application. But if you can imagine those being used in other applications as well, not just AR, but maybe even flat screen games, your hands are very naturally there, and most people can kind of guess at what you're supposed to do with them. So that could be a place where maybe those controllers end up being used, in other applications than mixed reality stuff. I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question.
No, I mean, even a fully haptic, if it were light enough weight, right? I mean, I think like a super lightweight glove, right, it's a lot of this stuff actually comes down to material science and like what you can actually do, like what you can actually manufacture. That's been a real stopper for years for haptics. I mean, which for me go back to grad school. So before I was in the industry, we were talking about haptic feedback in basically gloves, right? I mean, we couldn't do it in gloves because the material science weren't there yet. But the idea was to be able to actually do stuff with your hands, have it recognize what you were doing without having anything, just like a very lightweight, ideally glove on your hands.
Yeah.
And with wireless technology constantly improving, and of course materials themselves getting lighter and lighter, maybe that's a thing as well. Like you put on this glove and now actually it just maps. I mean, that was one of the real problems with VR when we were trying it back in the 90s was, how to read the hands in such a way that it felt comfortable, and you could actually feel like in the environment you were doing a thing, that it mapped somehow to your intentions of what you wanted to do, which is a big part of the problem. So, so how it maps. Then, of course, you get into cultural stuff, and then you add whole levels of other stuff. But we'll just leave it there. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of those things are interesting areas.
The other one that I don't know that much about, I've only interacted with a little bit, but I'll make a prediction because I think it's going to be like one of those behind the scenes sort of slow burn innovation areas is eye tracking stuff. I think there hasn't been any huge leaps with it yet, but I feel like it's always back there and somebody's always working on it. And I think because human to human, we use eye tracking a lot to sort of for body language and identifying sort of what the frame of mind of somebody we're talking to and face to face is like. I think eye tracking is something that might end up influencing games quite a bit in the future too. It'll be a ways out, but I don't know.
It's a good point. And with headsets on and VR, obviously that's a good place also to put in cameras that are close. Mm-hmm. And can track eyes really, really well. One would hope. I mean, it's more processing power as well, so there are issues. But yeah, that's possibly another area, and it's certainly with Facebook owning Oculus something they're going to worry about,
right?
Because telepresence, which is to say virtual presence, in somebody else's headset, is going to rely a lot on that stuff. I've been playing Horizon Zero Dawn lately, and while I love the game, there's a lot of places where you have sort of Mass Effect style conversations where it's, look at this person's face, look at the other person's face. And some of that stuff feels unnatural, partly because of the modeling. There's limits to character modeling, obviously, but then also partly just because their eyes aren't quite right. They're good, but they're still like, it's that uncanny valley problem, right? Yeah. The characters look objectively amazing. And at the same time, they don't look quite right? So, it's going to be a big thing, I think, as Facebook wants to push Oculus more into a wider spread application, because it's been very expensive both to acquire and continue to develop. They're going to want more than games, which means, you're seeing these Facebook, whatever they are, the TVs that they want to put in everybody's house. They're going to want to push further to like, hey, why not also get a headset? And yeah, you thought it was cool to see your grandkids before. Now you get to see them in VR. Anyway, never mind that the grandkids probably want to play games. Anyway, let's, thank you, Mike, for that. Let's move on to what Mikkel said in.
All right. Good old Mikkel. An all-purpose game example, ? Is the subject from Mikkel Lodal, who has written in various times. Dear Brett and Tim, a new semester is up and running, and thanks to you guys, I've taken the plunge and tried something I've been wanting to do for some time with my introductory game design lecture. I've always had an inkling that Doom was a game I could use to say just about everything worth saying about digital games, and since you started up your series on it, just as I was starting up a new semester, I decided to try it out. It pretty clearly dawned on me that the one thing that was really missing was constructive gameplay. Doom could be used to cover destruction, hoarding, power fantasy, exploration, resource optimization, even to a certain degree narrative, though environmental and incidental storytelling. But you did not construct anything, so no nurture mechanics either. Thankfully, I could fit it into a personal narrative of also playing Civilization 2 just a few years later, and use that to open up discussion of verbs as design pillars, as well as being able to use the two games as examples throughout all the models I ran through. I wasn't completely successful in using Doom to as great an effect as I thought I might, but I'll give it a shot next year when I have the benefit of your entire Doom run of podcast to put on the suggestion extra reading list. I wanted to ask you, since you're looking through all of these classic games to identify design pillars, do you have any games which you think you could use to point to everything you wanted to say about game design? What would your ideal game to structure an introductory lecture around? What would be your ideal game? And as usual, a sentence just for Tim. Paradimensional demonic entities materialize stupefyingly on the pugnacious planet and its faithful satellites, having transdimensionally transplaced themselves from a metaphysical realm birthed by overactive fancies of pre-secular followers of various monotheistic denominations of Middle Eastern Genesis.
Yes, I'm surprised you didn't get Zoroastrianism in there as well, but yeah, okay.
Venling Hilson, kind regards, Mikhail Ladal. Wow.
Yes.
Thanks once again for my favorite emails from you, Mikhail, and the challenging words that you throw at me. I appreciate
that is always a good time for me.
You love it. You're just sitting over there, just wringing your hands. And
I mean, there's a reason why these are split up the way that they are. And Mikhail's into it, so, I'm just going to keep doing it. Okay. It's funny because you get to the part where he's like giving you the challenge, and you've already made all kinds of other mistakes.
I know.
And now you're like, okay, I'm going to slow down. I'm going to do this part right.
Right. I'm just barnstorming through and saying whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of games that encapsulate so many things, okay, so I have 2 points. One is I don't think any one game probably can do all of those things equally well. So
it might not even be a good idea to pick just one game and try to do it.
Exactly right.
Depends
on the other hand, Minecraft. So those are my two answers. On the one hand, no one game can do all of these things. On the other hand, Minecraft, I guess, is pretty much where I land. Because it does. I mean, it's mostly, he says, it doesn't have constructive gameplay, and of course, Minecraft does. But I do think Minecraft has literally everything on his list.
Yeah, it is one of the first games that came to my mind as well, I'll be honest. As I was reading that sentence, I was when he was asking, I was like, yeah, that's true. It probably does. I think on the narrative side, it's pretty weak, though, so it doesn't really fully achieve that unless you're trying to work through.
Yeah, you'd have to squint. That's the thing you'd probably have to squint at more.
Well, you'd have to talk a lot about found narrative and player-created narratives.
Yeah.
Especially because it's seed-based worlds, and so there's really no flow to them.
Right. Yeah, there's just kind of an overarching technology tree. I mean, you can go to the Nether and actually finish the game and all of that stuff. There's actually an end to Minecraft.
Yeah.
So there's potentially that, which is a thing I didn't even know till my son showed me 5 years or so ago. Like, oh, here, welcome to the Nether. I'm like, the what? What are you talking about? Yeah. Like, oh, I went and did all this stuff, and I got a book, and I did this thing, and there's some ritual, and I opened a gateway, and here you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, Lee and I did that. Yeah. Terrifying.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Well, there's a whole nother. Maybe we'll play Minecraft someday.
Someday we'll play Minecraft. Was that 2008, something like that? Well, it's hard to put a date.
No, it was earlier. Yeah, it was earlier. If you talk about the alpha, shareware sort of version. The other game that initially came to mind, which would be obvious, and I'm sure he uses in various ways already, I'm generally going to come back to Nintendo. So, if you use, I would start with Zelda because there's so much going on there, but Zelda, Mario, and Metroid as sort of a
triptych, yeah.
That I feel like you hit a lot of the good stuff there. Maybe construction is not there as much as he would want, but I think you do in Zelda specifically. There is some of that, but I mean, it's a good question. I agree with you that my initial real answer would be I think it's tricky to find one game to do that. And I think if you're especially if you're, I mean, I'm not. You've done some teaching, and I have not in this space, in our game development space. So you'd be able to speak better to it than I would. But especially if you're doing an introduction to game design class, I think you would want a broader stroke than just one.
Yeah, we started with board games actually, and sort of folk games as well. But in terms of what we encourage students to use, sort of as, we used a lot of sort of toolkit games, and there was still Disney Infinity at the time and Project Spark as well as Minecraft, which were all kind of different levels of construction. Certainly Minecraft has some deep, redstone type stuff that you can do with it. I mean, it's kind of amazing what you can do with that thing. Oh, somebody actually also used Little Big Planet. So there are a lot of kind of different toolkits that we looked at, because we wanted the students to be able to build something without having to program necessarily often, although those games different games in that kind of sort of list had sort of different levels of what felt like programming. But yeah, we didn't really necessarily focus on games that covered all different types of play so much. We weren't trying to do that. We were more interested in what particular mechanics does this game have to lead to these particular aesthetics, and how does that contrast with another game, which might be set in what seems like a similar place or similar milieu, but has very different aesthetics and therefore different mechanics to generate them. And so for us, it was like, we talked about Call of Duty or other kind of power fantasy games versus this War of Mine. Both war games in a sense, right? They're both set in wartime and have very different goals in terms of what they want the player to feel. So we definitely went from a more critical perspective in that sense of like, hey, what do you actually feel playing these games, rather than what are the many different mechanics that could be in games. So
cool.
Different approach. Anyway, let's move on to the next email. I have one here from Sam Thomas. It's kind of shorter and it addresses something that we didn't do, but we'll talk about it. Doom co-op and source ports is the subject. Hey guys, if you do play episode 4, you should give co-op a try. It's really well designed in this game with infinite respawns during multiplayer. The best sessions usually devolve into an impromptu deathmatch after an accidental team kill or 2. Play on ultraviolence for the full experience. It's really not that hard. I have many fond memories of throwing waves of Doom Marines at the many cyber demons in Doom 2. SourcePort would be the best way to play co-op and will support playing over the internet. Some of the console versions also support online co-op, though I only have personal experience doing it on XBLA. Thanks for the awesome podcast, Sam. Yeah, we didn't orchestrate that at all.
Yeah, we should have. Yeah,
we probably should have. We did play. So a source port means taking. I think it came up at some point that it has open sourced the engines along the way. Not the latest, obviously, but certainly Quake, Doom 3's, even Quake 4, maybe. All those engines have been open source, and certainly the original Doom. But we both played a source port in order to play Sigil with GZ Doom. So, yeah, that's a thing that we both did.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned you played Doom 2 quite a bit co-op, right? And it's definitely part of it.
Always on a LAN though, and actually with the original game. So
yeah, right, yeah, it was definitely part of its identity, and it's a blind spot for our series, I would say, for sure, because it. I think with 2 and Quake is where deathmatch really became more of a fully realized thing. So that was the only slight lame justification that I have for not hitting it hard with Doom 1, because I think this was the early days, but
yeah, this is before widespread adoption of the internet.
Yeah,
for sure, right? So
ease and capability.
Quake is a different time.
Quake was really the pinnacle when it really started to, we saw what was going on, and multiplayer actually started becoming more important than the campaign was, as is evident by Quake 3, what that turned into.
Yeah, I mean, that was basically multiplayer only, right? I mean, effectively.
Yep.
I mean, they had bots and things, and I think Unreal Tournament was the same. Is that true?
Yeah, Unreal.
Yeah, that was basically the split, right? Is, you know, were you an Unreal Tournament person or a Quake 3 person?
Yeah.
I remember that. I played a little bit of each. By that time, I was already kind of drifting away from multiplayer. I had played a lot of both Doom and Quake on IRIX machines, as I mentioned a session or two ago. And yeah, I had a blast doing that. But as I got a job and had children, it became less of a thing I could even do. Just as it was becoming more widely adopted in the population at large. So yeah, I kind of inverted on that.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah, if we play Quake at some point, I mean,
yeah,
we kind of have to, don't we?
Right.
We should get some LEC Quake folks in here.
Oh man,
can you imagine?
That's a callback.
I'd be slaughtered. Oh my god, it'd be bad.
It'd be fun to. Yeah, that's a good idea, actually.
Yeah, we'll put a call out maybe when we get to that point, and maybe find a way to do that. Maybe I can do maybe there's a spectator mode. I can play a couple matches and then just watch.
Right.
All right. Well, thanks for the email, Sam. You want to tackle Ryan's?
Yeah. So subject is Doom/Sigil from Ryan Truk. Howdy, longtime listener, first time, I think, emailer. I feel like he's emailed before, but maybe not.
I think he's a Twitter commenter more than an emailer.
Okay. I just finished running through Sigil on Ultraviolence a few weeks ago, and I found that episode to feel a lot like Romero was having fun with the player. There are a lot of little tricks and traps that remind me of a Mario Maker level. Someone just out there having fun with design and that interaction between designer and player. The end result of me playing through Sigil has been me downloading Doom Builder 2 and Slade and taking a crack at making levels for myself and a few close friends to toy with. It's been really fun. Question: thinking about Sigil and John Romero and having that direct knowledge and connection between a player and the designer, and seeing that come across in the design, do you think that is something that is advantageous as a designer, or at least would be fun to engage with? With the way social media is now, I feel like this could be a thing that happens more often, but it also seems like that connection is most often lessening just due to the number of people who work on a single game. Any thoughts on this, or am I just too many levels deep in my personal hell? Thanks, Ryan Truk. Nice. Yeah, well, the this is I'm sure he thinks he's asking kind of a standard, fairly innocent question, but it's actually, for me, not. It's actually very complicated.
It is very complicated. I mean, there's a number of issues here, right? I mean, so on the one hand, like thinking about Sigil and John specifically, it's like, oh, well, we've had this, we have this interaction where John knows how we play because he's played and seen everybody play, and he knows how you're going to play. And so he plays with the fact of how you're going to play, right? Yeah. I mean, there's that. There's somebody who's like, oh, you're going to play this because you played Doom. So the big thing with Sigil, I guess, is this is not a game that you pick up as your first shooter, right? I mean, I can't imagine anybody out there picking up Sigil thinking, oh, I'll play that. That sounds cool. Let me play that. I've never heard of this Doom thing. Let me check it out, right? I mean, that's not a thing.
No, that's fair. Yeah, that's a good question. I think I agree. Yeah, it would be weird, I guess.
Right. I mean, I can't imagine you'd get to Sigil without knowing Doom.
Well, it's an homage, right? So
yeah.
You need he's making the assumption that you have a base understanding and foundation for it. Yeah.
Right. And he's toying with those expectations a lot. And I think also having those sort of surprise moments that we talked about last week, having that moment where you go, oh, you son of a, and you're chuckling and like, I can't believe you just did that to me, kind of moments. And I think that's only because there's this established relationship of design and designer.
Sigil's a very unique situation.
Yeah, absolutely. It is really unique.
Very rare.
Yeah, right. And that I think is why you're having trouble. Like,
Right.
oh my God.
Well,
Yeah.
because John's motivations and the purpose of Sigil is in many ways completely different than most of, or if not all of my situations that I've,
Right.
because I'm working on a game as a business as much as a creative endeavor, and that's where the forces often clash with the player designer relationship, because there's a lot going on there. And then the other side of it, which we've both been lucky enough to work on games that many players see. There isn't one player type out there. So it's also very tricky to understand, like when you're talking about that relationship, what player type do you pick, to have a relationship with?
Well, I mean, I think that's one of the things about Doom and some sort of how we've talked about Doom 2016 and it being more modern is that I think the original Doom has fewer types of players.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well,
which again makes it a kind of a unique situation, right?
Yeah.
But that's not the case with a modern, shooter, even the latest Call of Duty, whatever, or to speak to you, a Halo game, right? That's not the same thing at all as looking at Doom, a new Doom in 2019.
Right. Well, and I think
to fit the original ethos.
His point about social media too, that from when we began, in our careers, the landscape is very different with that relationship as well, and it's very unfiltered and difficult to actually, I guess, understand what that relationship should be sometimes and how it should be. So that's why it's just a hard thing to answer. At the core,
they were kind of the first to dip in their toes into that, though. And this actually came up in our first ever interview with
Ken Levine.
With Ken Levine, we were talking about how you used to be able to check John Carmack's plan file,
right,
on the internet, which of course I said in the most awkward way possible.
I don't remember
because the Unix command you would use to do that at the time was finger.
Oh boy.
So you could finger so-and-so, you finger some address, and you would get their plan file, and that's how you got updates to their plan file, which was just a text file that they put at a location known, to whatever finger did. I don't even remember the details of how that worked, but it was like how people communicated at the time. And they loved having that kind of feedback. That was kind of a little bit closer probably to Quake.
No, but his plan file is, that is the infamous... It's
legendary. Yeah.
Patch notes of its time, right?
Yeah. And he would be talking about whatever weird, I mean, it was mostly Carmack, I think, more than anybody else, but, talking about whatever weird issues he was coming into and trying to figure out how to write, his 18th game engine or whatever, his 18th renderer, I should say, more accurately, because he was constantly just doing new versions of renderers, or a new one all from the ground up. Oh, I have this new hardware. What can I do?
Do you know though, in that case, because it is a good early case that applies to id, do you know how much back and forth there really was though? Because I feel like that was,
it was more at designer level, like other people who were working the space, and there was sort of,
but player wise that like,
so there was still Usenet and there was still that stuff. So there was, I think that there was probably a rec.games.doom or something, where people would go and argue about whatever John had put in his latest plan file or something like that. I mean, I'm sure that was a thing.
No, but my question is, did John read that stuff? Did Carmack, you know what I mean?
I feel like there was, like I said, I think there was discussion more at the developer level than with fans. Although I think they saw some of that stuff, and I think that even then they sort of had community interaction that was very different. They liked hearing from fans. I can remember it being kind of the thing. So I mean, not directly, because it wasn't there. What you couldn't respond to a plan file. It was just a thing you looked at. It was pull only, right? Yeah. So there was no way to like poke yourself into to John's file and say, here's what I think. It was more if he was aware of you, and
Right.
all of that had to do with maybe Usenet notoriety, and also, like I said, competitors.
Right. Yeah.
Like who was the guy behind like Sin? I feel like that was a thing.
Level Lord.
Maybe that's not who I had in mind though.
Yeah, I don't. You're talking about George.
A little bit. Oh man, now it's gonna kill me.
Yeah. Anyway,
I'm gonna look it up while we talk.
Yeah, 3D
yeah, I mean, it was,
realms, folks, or
it was 3D Realms for sure. Yeah. I don't remember who was the kind of person that I associate with that.
Anyway,
but I mean, I definitely remember like those were the sort of people that were having these discussions through this kind of weird.
Right. It's just not. I guess my point is, it's not really the same.
It's not the same as
the same as the designer-player relationship that we have.
Right. Yeah, definitely agree. Yeah.
I mean, to quickly answer his question from a more abstract.
Yeah, it probably was Level Lord.
I feel like he was the driving force behind Sin, but I don't recall. I think from a more abstract perspective, if I don't get into the nitty gritty of like the actuality of like a direct relationship with designer and player, his question about is it advantageous and the concept of it, I do appreciate, and I am glad it does exist generally. And as a designer, I will say also that we do talk and think about it all the time. It is a constant thing that within the game development process, we do consider. And in fact, we, play test and there's all sorts of ways that we accomplish that relation. We try to both predict and have that relationship. It's just very complicated by a lot of other things, including social media, for how to actually accomplish the goal. But definitely, and I think he makes a good point that Sigil is a good example of like a distilled down version of the purest form of that happening, where you have this legendary designer doing something with this very unique situation. And that's why I think Sigil is such, like you said it best, it's a gift. Like there is no better example of a gift from somebody like John to give to. He could have asked for money for this thing easily.
Oh yeah. I mean, he did a physical edition, but yeah, for the download he didn't.
Yeah, but I mean that was like, and I looked that up too. But that was just that's cool, a special cool thing. I'm sure he made some of his money back, but how long has he been working on this thing? It's like it's just
he spent a significant amount of time on it. Yeah.
I think he's setting a good example. A little bit to Ryan's point, he's setting a good example for all of us when it comes to how that relationship should be seen, and maybe that positivity will rub off on both sides of that conversation. But anyway,
yeah, that'd be nice. I mean, I've always, I've said before on the podcast, and it's something I've always said, is that I really appreciate generosity from games, and I think that that's the thing that often makes people really angry about some of the bigger corporations, that are in the space, that they, they're nickel and diming you or whatever. You have this weird relationship with you where you feel like, you're just constantly trying to pull, more out, which is a really complicated thing, right? I mean, those business models also allow for a higher degree of fidelity, but it's, I often wonder, like, why not lower the fidelity a little bit? Mm-hmm. Spend more time on maybe the simulation if it's, for example, a soccer game. I'm trying not to say specific names here, but if why not just lower the fidelity a little bit, but to be able to give more in that. If the simulation itself has better fidelity, but maybe the graphics don't take 100 people to make, just to make them whatever, for an audience that's already feels like it should be big enough to support a product. I just, that stuff, I mean, I would like to see more following John's example. Like, you've given me a lot and here's something back. And I feel like I've been lucky to work, at least for, one company that I felt like did that pretty well, gave a lot in their games. So yeah.
Yeah.
But that's not a social media thing. That's just a sort of how I feel, the role of art in, even in a capitalist society, has to be one of a gift and generosity, in my opinion. So,
yep.
All right. You want to tackle a couple more?
I think we can get through them.
Okay. All right. I have one here that's very short. And actually, I'll just go ahead and make this Brett's book recommendation.
Okay.
Because it's an email from John York, who says, apologies if you already mentioned it and I missed it. I just wanted to mention this excellent book about the early days of id Software. It actually came up on the podcast, but it was always going to be my book minute, because how could it not be?
Yeah.
It is Masters of Doom. He says that he just finished it and loved every minute. I'm sure a lot of your listeners would too. Yeah, totally recommend this book. I read it. I'm not sure I actually got to the very end of it, but I read most of it a couple of years ago. I had it in my Kindle, and I just kind of picked it up one day and read through almost all of it. It's a pretty good read, and really kind of covers what it was like to be at id Software at the time. And so these early heady days of this, and well worth a read.
And
I think
did we mention the TV show on air, or was that?
We have not mentioned the TV show on air, so yeah, good tie-in. Go ahead and throw that in there.
Well, yeah, USA just announced that they got the rights via James Franco and his brother, but who were also behind the Disaster Artist movie, which was based on a book that Tom Bissell wrote. I guess Tom Bissell's writing the show. It's going to be an anthology show, so just the first season's about Masters of Doom. I think they're going to do other legendary developer stories after this season. But yeah, so they
called me about Republic Commando. So okay. No, they did not. That's a joke, folks. That's a joke. Don't email.
Have fun. I can't wait for that casting. Paul Reiser.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Thanks so much. Thanks. Oh, my God. I can't even remember what he sounds like. Tim saying that, because that was my thing when we worked together on Republic Commando, is that I was like the Paul Reiser from Mad About You, I guess, at the time.
Yeah, because we were watching at the time. You don't have to remember what he sounds like. You already sound like him.
Not anymore. At the time, though, I had the rhythm of whatever. Yeah, there was a way he spoke, and I don't really remember.
My casting will be as a Muppet, so
yes,
will literally be a frog or a puppet. Anyway, so USA is doing a one season devoted to that book, Masters of Doom. So I'm sure some of the fans who read the news have already seen that, but they just cast John Romero and John Carmack, as well as a few others. Tom Hall's in it. I was happily surprised by that casting, who I think in the press release I read described Tom Hall as the heart and soul of id or something like that. So, which that's cool to hear. We had him on.
Yeah.
Right? So
we did for Anachronox. So you can go back and have that interview, because it was pretty. It's pretty great. So,
all right. So next one.
Yeah, go ahead and thank you for that. And go ahead to. This is Oscar Fiasco.
This is our last one?
Go ahead. No, I have one more after that.
Okay. The subject is level design, expansion and contraction. Ooh, I like that subject. From, quote, Oscar Fiasco, unquote. Okay. I don't know this fellow or person.
Comes to my streams.
Okay.
So I had to read down to the bottom, because that is not Oscar's real name.
Okay. Well, the quotes gave it away. Tim and Brett, I was watching a Let's Play of The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, and the player, Day 9, mentioned the concept in game design where the player's options are expanded and then shrunk in a cycle-like fashion. This reminded me of Tim's mention of the level in Sigil, where there were different paths that had to be completed in order to continue with a teleport back to the start after finishing each path. The basic loop the player completes as playing as follows. The player is given first, the player is given an obvious goal. Then the player finds forks that gives the player options. Then the goal is completed through going down the different paths. Then, after completing the goal, the player's options contract, giving a shortcut like Sigil's teleport. And then a new obvious goal is shown. This loop of activities seems to be a great way to make linear content feel nonlinear. What do you guys think? How often does this kind of idea pop up? Oscar Fiasco. P.S. Great podcast. And Brett, great stream.
Yes, thank you for stopping by from time to time, Oscar. Yeah, so I mean, my original thought about this was something I don't think we talked about a ton with Super Mario 64, but I remember this being a discussion in the development community at the time, which was the way that opened up multiple opportunities to go and get stars, I guess, to be able to unlock later paths, later portraits or pictures or whatever in the castle.
Mm-hmm.
So that you had this sort of natural individual starting point, and then this sort of broadening of possibilities, and then sort of narrowing down again, because at a certain point you have to get enough to open the next big section, the next level of the castle or what have you. So that was my natural sort of thought, was that being a discussion of like, oh, multiple branches, any one of them is essentially linear. You have to do a bunch of them in order to come back. And that sort of has this, expansion contraction sort of graph that you could actually, draw out, if you really kind of dug into it. That was I would say that's when it popped up for me. So that's the late 90s, I guess. How about you?
Oh, when the concept popped up originally, I missed. Yeah.
Yeah. He says, how often does this kind of idea pop up?
Yeah. Well, my
all the time.
But my macro answer to that is that I would say that Day 9 is nailing it in that it is, I would call it one of the cornerstones actually of design. And it's not just a world design and level design thing. I believe I feel like I even mentioned it in this episode earlier on, talking about Doom 2016, because in the mechanical resource loops that I was mentioning that we were talking a lot about, there is an inherent expansion and contraction in that process. And it creates a pacing for the combat. So it's not even just, you could just be in a square, in a cube, in a box with no level design in there, just throwing the enemies in and then fighting them. And you would have an expansion contraction sort of based on the way the enemies are spawning or how many there are or the mixture. And so, good enemy spawning and usage creates expansion and contraction as well with that resource sort of gathering. So, so I think for the answer for me is it comes up all the time. I feel like we would talk about it at work almost daily in some ways. But, to use another example from like a genre example, with one of the interesting things that open world games, I think, brought to the expansion contraction conversation, to sound silly about it, is that there's an obvious expansion contraction with the way the world is constructed. But then when you place a goal in the middle of that world, or a base or a quest, you become focused and thus contracted on that one goal. And then the player is given the ability to opt in or out of that as they go, because it's an open world game. Sometimes they lock you in, which Red Dead, for instance, got hit on because there were sometimes missions that you couldn't leave whenever you wanted to, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't know, but I've heard that.
No, that's true. Yeah.
But in good, very flow based.
Basically, when you go to Mexico.
Yeah, or I was talking about the new one, but yeah. So
I haven't played that one.
It's kind of a Rockstar thing they do.
Yeah.
So it kind of seems counterintuitive, but anyway, yeah, I think it's a good point, and I think John in Sigil shows some really good sort of like fundamentals in that I'm sure was very intentional on his part. So I think Oscar has a good breakdown of the fundamentals of that. And I think it's something to look out for in any game you're playing. I bet you'll see it everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I had not thought about it because I didn't analyze all the games actually before I was in the industry. Occasionally I would see a game and think, how does this thing work technically? Like, how would I actually build this game? But very rarely did I look at design until I was actually making the things. And, a lot of our games don't have a ton of that expansion and contraction, except at sort of that moment to moment level of like, lots of enemies, fewer enemies, lots of enemies, fewer enemies, right?
Yeah.
Kind of natural heartbeat, right, of pacing. But of course, even the Starfighter games have that of like, oh, okay, I've started whittling down. There's only a few left, and that's when the level designer or the mission designer throws in a ton more to have to deal with, or some new challenge.
Yeah.
But it's like breathing, right? It's like, oh, okay, I'm expanding my lungs, and now I'm breathing out as I clear things out.
It creates natural pacing, and I don't know. It's probably actually a good thing for me in I guess in my work that I probably could look into, but I'm sure there's some good psychological studies and things, analyses done on this sort of topic, because I would even say, though it's kind of just dawning on me now, I'm sure someone else has thought about this before, but I would even say that you probably need it from a player's perspective, expansion and contraction in some sort of rhythm, because players, if you imagine a choice space being ever expanding, and some games do try to do this, I think often it just gets overwhelming for players. So I think mentally people just need that contraction to happen, both from a focus perspective, so you have something you're focusing on that isn't all of the choice space, but then once you achieve that goal, you want to have more options, and then the cycle to start over again, because I think it overwhelms people. It just gets to be too much.
Right, yeah.
So you kind of want that to go back and forth, so the player feels comfortable and safe for that contraction period, and then it's like, okay, good, breather. Okay, now give me some more choice space. Okay, I'm overwhelmed. Okay, I'm going to pick one. Okay, now I'm going to go. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's very fair. I mean, I was actually thinking of a very kind of pure sort of engineered example of this in Left 4 Dead, where there was that story director business, which was basically maintaining that sort of like player.
It's a good example. Yeah.
Yeah. Player level of exhaustion, right? Really, of like, oh, I had this really intense thing. Oh, now I have a safe room. Like literally I have a safe space where I can go, I can get some ammo, I can figure out what I'm going to do next. I can literally just take a moment to breathe. Then I'm going to go out and maybe I'm going to have to encounter a witch or, whatever, some of the other crazy enemies in those games, and have those, how am I going to tackle this problem? There's multiple ways to do it. I'm going to make a bunch of decisions. Things are going to go crazy because Brett's going to accidentally shoot the witch because he doesn't know what they do. And then I'm going to end up in a safe room, hopefully on the other side of that again. And you have that very
closet and no one's going to let you out.
That's right. They're like, just stay here. You're no help to us out there. Just be in here, please.
Yeah. No, that's a really good example, actually, because it's a proc gen version of contraction and expansion. In many ways. The level design does it for sure as well, but even without the safe rooms, I would say once you're in the gameplay space, you have a tank show up or something like that, and it creates a contraction for a second, even within combat, right? Because everyone has to focus on that. They're not called tanks, though, are they? I think they're called tanks. Yeah,
I am, dude.
The big ones, the big brawlers, the
yes,
rolling ones. But
you're asking me to remember a thing that I didn't care about then, and I still don't care about now. You know me.
That game is just terrifying still to this day. But
it really is. I mean, I think I only ever finished 2 levels of that, and there's 4, I think, in the first one, and then probably another 4 in the second one.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Yeah.
But like you could be fighting a horde of zombies, and then you have that tank show up, and everyone changes their focus, right? And
yep.
Middle of combat. So there's even that kind of example. So it works on many.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and it's a great object lesson from that standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I have a couple other emails, but they're actually, looking at them again, there are game suggestions. And so I usually just kind of file those away, and I will reply to those individually. But thank you for those. One person who prefers to remain anonymous, another person who's written in before. Both games are games I need to talk to you about as potentials for the future for different reasons, and I'm just going to leave it there.
Okay.
We are still nailing down. We do think we have an interview. We're hoping to be able to record it for next time, but I want to actually maybe segue to talking about our next game just in case we have to play that next.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good
one. So first, thanks for those emails. Thanks for sending those to devgameclub@gmail.com. I don't think I said that at the beginning, but I always want to put that out there. you, sir, because you sent me a copy of this game, and so I am thrilled to revisit it.
Okay.
Tell us what we're going to be playing next for our scary month of October.
Yeah, something that Brett likes to do for October, which I love that we are doing on the podcast and we have done consistently, is we try to play a good Halloween game for October if the timing works out, and it always has. So we played things like Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Thief, right? Those have been our...
I think those have been the three, yeah.
Yeah. So this time we are turning to Eternal Darkness, a fairly cult classic, very interesting, weird game, both from itself as well as its development.
Yeah, true enough.
Hard to find because it's still only been on one platform and never re-released. They even just a used copy, as I just found out, isn't cheap. And, you need to play it on a GameCube or a Wii to be able to even play it. So it's kind of an interesting trip down memory lane. I have very fond memories of playing it. They do a lot of interesting things with fear. And it's a survival horror, but it's kind of on the cosmic horror side of that. And so, yeah, I'm excited about it. And tomorrow is the first, by when we're recording this, at least.
Yep.
So we're right on time.
Yeah, no, it's great. I'm so glad that you managed to track down a copy. I need to go actually check my mailbox after this. The cosmic horror is one thing about this. There's also... It is just distinct from the other ones we've played. I mean, I think it's closer probably to a Resident Evil. Probably owes the most to that than it does to like a Silent Hill. But it does so many other weird things that it's definitely its own thing.
Yeah.
It's also a game that has... Did you play this 3 times?
Oh, I remember what you're talking about. No, I did not. I definitely did not play 3 times, but
okay.
I remember.
I don't think I'll probably have time over the course of our discussion to do that, but I might actually try to do that this time because I'm very curious. Although I think I had, at some point, just watched the YouTube or whatever to be like, what happens at the end of that one? It's probably not worth the hours, but I don't know. I'm a crazy person. I'm ever hopeful that this one will someday show up on a more modern platform. But I can imagine also due to its studio history, maybe never appearing again.
Yeah.
So who knows what'll happen there. Yeah.
Situation.
Yeah. Who knows? It is. But yeah, I mean, I'm super thrilled to get to revisit it. I didn't own a copy. I borrowed a copy from a friend at the time. Shout outs to Nathan Martz. So I never had a copy, so I would have still held a copy, till now if I had known. But I really look forward to digging into it again. So I'll use that as a segue to say, check out our Twitter page if you want to find out where we're playing to if we don't schedule the interview in time. I'm hopeful, but things happen. So you can find that at Dev Game Club on Twitter, where you can also find my co-host at
Tim Longa Jr. with a JR at the end.
I have been tweeting now and again, but mostly about my new bicycling career at Brett_Duville. You can, of course, also find me on Twitch streaming both whatever I'm playing at the moment and our podcast game. So I'll be playing that on the weekends. You'll be seeing me playing some Eternal Darkness. And for the month of October on my stream, I'm also going to be playing Alan Wake in the wake of Control coming out. I thought I'd play Alan Wake, which is a game I never got around to, but have had a copy of for quite some time because me. So anyway, you can check the show notes for that link. I guess thanks so much for joining us, and good night.
Good night.